Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out of the construction site trailer. The summer heat in downtown Chicago was brutal, but he had grown used to it over the past 5 years. At 28, he had worked his way up from a basic laborer to a project supervisor, managing crews that built office towers and luxury condominiums for the wealthy elite he could only dream of becoming. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother, Elena. "Doctor says I need surgery for my back. Can we talk tonight?" Marcus sighed deeply. His mother had been struggling with chronic pain for months, working double shifts as a hospital cleaner to make ends meet. The medical bills were piling up, and he knew she was trying to hide the severity of her condition from him. Elena Thompson had raised Marcus alone after his father abandoned them when Marcus was just 7 years old. She worked multiple jobs throughout his childhood, cleaning offices at night and working at a local diner during the day. Despite their poverty, she always made sure Marcus had clean clothes for school and food on the table. She encouraged his education and celebrated every small achievement, from passing tests to graduating high school with decent grades. Marcus drove his beat-up Honda Civic to his mother's small apartment in the South Side. The building was old and worn, with peeling, paint and broken mailboxes. Elena greeted him at the door with her usual warm smile, though he could see the pain in her eyes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her faded uniform from the hospital. "How bad is it, Mom?" Marcus asked as they sat at her small kitchen table. The apartment was spotless despite its age, filled with photos of Marcus from childhood through his recent construction achievements. Elena's smile faded. "The doctor says I need spinal surgery. Without it, I might end up in a wheelchair within 2 years. But the insurance won't cover everything. I need about $30,000 for the procedure and recovery time." Marcus felt his stomach drop. $30,000 might as well have been $30 million. He made decent money as a supervisor, but after his own rent, car payment, and student loans, he barely had any savings. "We'll figure something out, Mom. Maybe I can get a second job or take out a loan." That weekend, Marcus was working overtime on a high-end residential project in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The luxury condominiums they were building sold for millions of dollars each. As he reviewed blueprints, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the construction site. A woman stepped out, and Marcus found himself staring. Victoria Sterling was unlike anyone he had ever seen. She had long auburn hair that caught the sunlight, and she wore an elegant cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her heels clicked confidently on the pavement as she approached the site, speaking rapidly on her phone in what sounded like business negotiations. "Excuse me," she called to Marcus. "I'm Victoria Sterling. My company is considering purchasing the penthouse unit. Could someone show me around?" Marcus introduced himself and offered to give her a personal tour. As they walked through the construction site, Victoria asked intelligent questions about the building's features and timeline. She seemed genuinely interested in his explanations, and Marcus found himself speaking more confidently than usual. "You really know your stuff," Victoria said as they reached the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of Lake Michigan. "Most contractors just give me generic responses." Marcus felt a flush of pride. "I've been doing this for years, started from the bottom and worked my way up." Victoria studied him with genuine curiosity. "That's admirable. Self-made success is rare these days." She handed him her business card. "I'd like to continue this conversation over dinner. Are you free tomorrow evening?" Marcus stared at the elegant card with gold lettering. Victoria Sterling was the CEO of Sterling Industries, a multinational corporation he had heard about but never imagined he would have any connection to. "Are you sure? I mean, I'm just a construction supervisor." "You're a man who built himself up from nothing," Victoria replied. "That's exactly the kind of person I respect." She smiled warmly. "There's a restaurant called Le Bernardin. 8 o'clock tomorrow. I'll make the reservation." That night, Marcus called his mother to tell her about the unexpected dinner invitation. Elena was excited for him, but reminded him to stay grounded. Rich people live in a different world, mijo. Be careful not to lose yourself. Marcus spent his entire paycheck on a new suit for the dinner. Le Bernardin was the kind of restaurant he had only seen in movies, with crystal chandeliers and waiters in formal attire. Victoria was already seated when he arrived, looking even more stunning in a black evening dress. The conversation flowed naturally. Victoria told him about growing up in a wealthy family but feeling isolated and misunderstood. Her father had built Sterling Industries from a small manufacturing company into a global empire, and the pressure to maintain that legacy was enormous. "Everyone sees the money and assumes I have it easy," she said. "But I've never met anyone who wanted to know the real me." Marcus shared stories about his childhood, his mother's sacrifices, and his determination to build something meaningful with his life. Victoria listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine empathy. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly seen and understood by someone. As the evening ended, Victoria took his hand. "I haven't felt this connected to someone in years. Would you like to see each other again?" Over the following weeks, Marcus and Victoria began dating regularly. She introduced him to a world of luxury he had never imagined, from exclusive restaurants to private art galleries. She bought him expensive clothes and insisted on paying for everything, despite his initial protests. But the more time Marcus spent in Victoria's world, the more aware he became of the vast difference between their lives. Her casual mention of spending thousands of dollars on a weekend trip contrasted sharply with his mother's struggle to afford basic medical care. The guilt weighed on him heavily, especially when Elena called to update him on her worsening condition. Marcus found himself torn between two worlds, unsure of where he truly belonged or what choice he would ultimately have to make. 3 months into their relationship, Marcus found himself living a double life. During the day, he managed construction crews and dealt with the practical realities of building projects. But evenings and weekends belonged to Victoria's glamorous world of charity galas, exclusive social events, and 5-star restaurants. Victoria's friends and family began accepting Marcus into their circle, though he often felt like an outsider looking in. At a charity auction for the Children's Hospital, Marcus watched wealthy donors casually bid thousands of dollars on artwork and vacation packages. The amount of money being thrown around in a single evening could have solved his mother's medical problems 10 times over. "You're quiet tonight," Victoria observed as they drove home in her luxury car. "Everything okay?" Marcus hesitated. He had been thinking about his mother, who had called earlier that day to say she had to cut back to part-time work because the pain was becoming unbearable. "Just work stuff," he said, not wanting to burden Victoria with his family problems. Victoria reached over and squeezed his hand. "You know you can tell me anything, right? We're a team now." The next morning, Marcus visited his mother and found her struggling to get out of bed. Elena had always been strong and independent, but the deteriorating condition of her spine was robbing her of basic mobility. Her small savings account had been depleted by medical tests and consultations with specialists. "I might have to quit my job entirely," Elena admitted, tears in her eyes. "The pain medication makes me dizzy, and I can't clean properly anymore. But if I don't work, I can't keep this apartment." Marcus felt a crushing sense of helplessness. His own salary was decent, but not enough to support both his life with Victoria and his mother's medical needs. The two worlds seemed impossible to bridge. That weekend, Victoria invited Marcus to her family's estate in Lake Forest. The Sterling mansion was a sprawling property with perfectly manicured gardens, a tennis court, and a private lake. Victoria's parents, Harold and Margaret Sterling, welcomed Marcus with polite curiosity. Harold Sterling was a distinguished man in his 60s who had built his fortune through smart investments and strategic business acquisitions. He questioned, Marcus about his background and ambitions during dinner, clearly evaluating whether this young construction worker was worthy of his daughter's attention. "Victoria tells me you've worked your way up from nothing," Harold said over brandy in his study. "I respect that. But you should understand that our family operates at a certain level. Victoria will inherit significant responsibilities when I retire." Margaret Sterling was more direct. "Marcus, dear, you seem like a nice young man. But Victoria needs someone who can move in our social circles, someone who understands the demands of wealth and business. Are you prepared for that kind of life?" Marcus felt the weight of their expectations and the vast gulf between his current situation and what they expected from Victoria's partner. "I'm willing to learn," he said, though doubt crept into his voice. Later that night, as he and Victoria walked around the estate's lake, she brought up the future more seriously than ever before. "My father is planning to retire in 2 years. He wants me to take over as CEO of Sterling Industries. It's a massive responsibility, but it's also an incredible opportunity." "That's amazing," Marcus said, genuinely happy for her success. Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him. "I want you to be part of it, not just as my boyfriend, but as my partner in everything. We could build something incredible together." Marcus felt his heart racing. The opportunity she was describing was beyond his wildest dreams, but it also felt impossibly distant from his current reality. "Victoria, there's something I need to tell you about my family situation." For the first time, Marcus opened up completely, about his mother's condition, the mounting medical bills, and his own financial struggles. Victoria listened with genuine concern and sympathy. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. $30,000 is nothing. I can write a check tomorrow morning." Marcus felt a mix of relief and shame. "I can't just take money from you. It doesn't feel right." Victoria took his hands. "Marcus, if we're going to build a life together, we need to support each other. Your mother's health is important to me because she's important to you. Let me help." The next week, Marcus accompanied Victoria to meet with her family's financial advisors and lawyers. They discussed trust funds, investment strategies, and long-term financial planning. The numbers being thrown around made Marcus dizzy. Victoria's inheritance alone was worth more than most people could spend in several lifetimes. "If you marry Victoria," Harold explained, "you'll have access to resources that can secure your future and your family's future forever. But it comes with expectations and responsibilities. You'll need to present yourself as a worthy partner for a Sterling." Marcus left the meeting with his head spinning. The solution to all his problems was within reach, but it required him to transform into someone completely different from who he had always been. When he visited his mother that evening, Elena immediately sensed the change in him. "You look troubled, mijo. What's wrong?" Marcus struggled to find the words. "Victoria offered to pay for your surgery. Her family has more money than we could ever imagine." Elena studied her son's face carefully. But, I feel like I'm losing myself. Her world is so different from ours. Sometimes I wonder if I'm changing too much, becoming someone you wouldn't recognize." Elena took her son's hands in hers. "Marcus, I didn't sacrifice everything to raise you so that you could feel ashamed of where you come from. Money can solve many problems, but it shouldn't cost you your soul." Marcus spent sleepless nights wrestling with the decision. Accept Victoria's help and embrace the life she offered, or maintain his independence and watch his mother suffer. The choice seemed impossible, and he knew that whatever he decided would change the course of his life forever. The pressure mounted when Victoria began making plans for their future together, talking about engagement rings and wedding venues. She was clearly in love and saw their relationship as heading toward marriage, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled away from everything that had shaped him into the man he was. The transformation began subtly. Victoria hired a personal stylist to update Marcus's wardrobe, replacing his casual clothes with designer suits and expensive accessories. She enrolled him in etiquette classes to prepare him for high society. events, and business dinners. "It's just polish," she assured him. "You're already perfect underneath." Marcus tried to embrace the changes, telling himself that adapting to Victoria's world was a small price to pay for the opportunities it offered. He practiced proper dining etiquette, learned about wine and art, and studied financial reports from Sterling Industries to better understand the business world he was entering. But the changes went deeper than surface appearances. Marcus found himself spending less time with his old friends from the construction crew, who increasingly seemed to have nothing in common with his new life. When he did see them, conversations felt strained and artificial. "You're different, man," his longtime friend Carlos observed during what had become a rare lunch meeting. "It's like you're playing a part or something." Marcus defended his evolution. "I'm just growing, learning new things. There's nothing wrong with bettering yourself." Carlos shook his head. "Bettering yourself is one thing. Becoming someone else entirely is different. Your mom raised you to be proud of where you come from, not to run away from it." The comment stung because it contained more truth than Marcus wanted to acknowledge. He was running away from his past, convinced that it was necessary to secure his future. But the distance he was creating between himself and his roots grew wider each day. Meanwhile, Elena's condition continued to worsen. She had been forced to quit her job entirely and was now dependent on disability benefits that barely covered her basic living expenses. The surgery she needed had been postponed twice due to insurance complications, and her mobility was becoming severely limited. When Marcus visited her apartment, he was shocked by how much she had deteriorated in just a few weeks. Elena was using a walker to get around, and simple tasks like cooking or cleaning had become nearly impossible. Her small apartment, once immaculately maintained, showed signs of neglect that revealed the depth of her struggle. "I don't want to be a burden on you," Elena said as Marcus helped her prepare dinner. "You have your own life to live now." "You're not a burden, Mom. You're my family." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt the weight of his divided loyalties. Victoria expected him to attend a charity gala that weekend, while his mother clearly needed more support than he was providing. The breaking point came during a dinner at the Sterling estate with several prominent business leaders and their families. Marcus had been practicing his social skills, and the evening was going well until the conversation turned to social welfare programs and government assistance. "The problem with these programs," declared Robert Whitfield, a banking executive, "is that they create dependency. People need to learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps instead of relying on handouts." Several others at the table nodded in agreement. Margaret Sterling added, "It's really about personal responsibility. Successful people make good choices while others make excuses." Marcus felt his blood pressure rising as he listened to the casual dismissal of people like his mother, who had worked multiple jobs her entire life, only to find herself unable to afford basic medical care. "Maybe some people just haven't had the same opportunities," he said carefully. Harold Sterling fixed him with a stern look. "Marcus, surely you understand that success comes from hard work and smart decisions. Your own rise from humble beginnings proves that anyone can succeed if they apply themselves." The implication was clear. If his mother was struggling, it must be due to her own failures rather than systemic problems or bad luck. Marcus bit his tongue, knowing that arguing would damage his relationship with Victoria's family and potentially jeopardize his future. After dinner, Victoria pulled him aside. "You seem tense tonight. Is everything okay?" Marcus struggled to explain his frustration without sounding ungrateful for the opportunities her family was providing. "Sometimes the way people talk about poverty makes it sound like everyone who struggles is just lazy or making bad choices. It's not that simple." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "I understand that you've seen hardship firsthand, but you have to remember that most people in my family's circle have worked very hard for their success. They're not trying to be insensitive." The next morning, Marcus received a call that changed everything. Elena had collapsed at home and been rushed to the emergency room. When he arrived at the hospital, the doctor explained that her condition had reached a critical stage. Without immediate surgery, she risked permanent paralysis. "We can schedule the procedure for next week," the doctor said, "but we'll need a significant deposit before we can proceed." Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. He had been putting off accepting Victoria's financial help, trying to maintain some semblance of independence. But now, his mother's life was on the line. He called Victoria, immediately explaining the emergency. "Of course," she said without hesitation. "I'll have my accountant wire the money to the hospital today. Don't worry about anything except being there for your mother." For the next week, Marcus divided his time between the hospital and his obligations. To Victoria's world. Elena's surgery was successful, but her recovery would be long and difficult. She would need physical therapy, home care assistance, and ongoing medical treatment. Victoria continued to support them financially, never making Marcus feel guilty about the mounting expenses. But her generosity came with subtle expectations about his priorities and future commitments. "I know this is a difficult time," Victoria said as they sat in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city. "But we can't put our lives on hold indefinitely. My father is planning to announce my promotion to CEO next month, and we need to start making decisions about our future together." Marcus realized that Victoria saw his mother's crisis as a temporary obstacle to their relationship rather than an ongoing responsibility that would require his continued attention and support. The wealthy world he was entering had solutions for everything, but those solutions often involved delegating problems to hired help rather than providing personal care and attention. Standing at his mother's bedside the next day, watching her struggle through painful physical therapy, Marcus began to understand the true cost of the choice he was facing. Success in Victoria's world required him to think like her family, to see people like his mother as problems to be solved rather than human beings deserving of dignity and personal care. The realization left him more conflicted than ever about the path he was choosing and the man he was becoming. 6 months after Elena's surgery, the Sterling family made their expectations crystal clear. Victoria's engagement to Marcus was being treated as a foregone conclusion, with Margaret Sterling already consulting wedding planners and discussing venues. The pressure was subtle but constant, woven into every family gathering and business meeting. "We're thinking a spring wedding would be lovely," Margaret mentioned during Sunday brunch at the country club. "It gives us enough time to plan something truly spectacular. After all, this will be quite the social event." Marcus smiled and nodded, but internally he felt like he was being swept along by a current too strong to resist. Every aspect of the proposed wedding reflected Victoria's world rather than his own preferences or background. The guest list included hundreds of business associates and society figures, but no space was being made for his construction crew friends or his mother's modest social circle. Victoria seemed genuinely excited about their future, often discussing plans for their married life with an assumption that Marcus shared her vision completely. "Once we're married, you'll need to resign from construction work, of course," she said casually one evening. "Daddy has already identified several executive positions at Sterling Industries that would be perfect for you." The idea of abandoning the career he had built from nothing felt like losing a fundamental part of his identity. "I've worked hard to get where I am in construction," Marcus said carefully. "Maybe I could continue consulting or managing projects part-time." Victoria laughed as if he had made a joke. "Darling, you'll be far too busy with your new responsibilities. Besides, construction work isn't really compatible with our social obligations and business commitments." Meanwhile, Elena was making progress in her recovery, but remained fragile and dependent on assistance for many daily activities. Marcus had arranged for a home health aide using money from Victoria, but he knew his mother was uncomfortable with the arrangement. Elena had always been fiercely independent, and accepting charity from people she had never met was difficult for her proud spirit. "I don't like taking their money," Elena confided during one of Marcus's visits. It makes me feel like a burden, like I owe them something I can never repay. Marcus tried to reassure her. Victoria's family has more money than they could ever spend. Helping us is nothing to them. But Elena's concerns ran deeper than financial obligation. Marcus, when people give you everything, they expect to control everything. Are you prepared for that kind of life? The question haunted Marcus because he was beginning to see the truth in his mother's observation. Harold Sterling had started, including him in business meetings, but always as a junior participant expected to listen and learn rather than contribute meaningful input. Victoria's friends treated him with polite acceptance, but he sensed they saw him as Victoria's project rather than their equal. The breaking point came during a family dinner where the Sterlings were discussing their charitable foundation's annual gala. The event raised money for various causes, and this year's beneficiary was a program providing medical care for low-income families. "It's wonderful that we can help these unfortunate people," Margaret said while reviewing the guest list. Of course, we have to be careful about which families we feature in our promotional materials. We want sympathetic cases that don't make our donors uncomfortable. Harold nodded in agreement. The key is finding people who are genuinely deserving, not those who've made poor life choices that led to their circumstances. Marcus listened to the conversation with growing discomfort, thinking about his mother's lifetime of hard work and the medical crisis that had threatened to destroy her financially. According to the Sterling family's logic, Elena would be considered deserving of help, but only if she remained grateful and invisible. What makes someone deserving versus undeserving? Marcus asked, unable to remain silent. Harold looked surprised by the question. Well, someone who works hard, makes responsible decisions, and faces circumstances beyond their control, as opposed to people who expect others to solve problems they created through their own poor choices. Victoria placed a warning hand on Marcus's arm, sensing his growing agitation, but he couldn't let the moment pass. How do you tell the difference? My mother worked multiple jobs her entire life and still couldn't afford the medical care she needed. Was that her fault for not making better choices or a system that doesn't provide adequate health care for working people? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Margaret Sterling's expression grew cold. Marcus, dear, surely you're not suggesting that successful people are responsible for others' misfortunes? I'm suggesting that maybe the line between deserving and undeserving isn't as clear as we'd like to think, Marcus replied, feeling Victoria's grip tighten on his arm. Harold's voice carried a note of warning. Young man, you need to understand something about wealth and responsibility. We've earned our success through hard work and smart decisions. We choose to be generous with those less fortunate, but that generosity comes with expectations about gratitude and appropriate behavior. The message was unmistakable. Marcus was expected to be grateful for their generosity toward his mother and to avoid challenging their worldview or making them uncomfortable with inconvenient questions about social justice or systemic inequality. That night, Victoria was furious. How could you embarrass me like that? My parents are trying to accept you into our family, and you repay them by lecturing them about social issues. Marcus tried to explain his perspective. I wasn't lecturing anyone. I just think there's more complexity to poverty and success than your family acknowledges. Their generosity is paying for your mother's medical care, Victoria shot back. The least you could do is show some appreciation instead of criticizing their values. The argument escalated, with Victoria accusing Marcus of being ungrateful, and Marcus feeling like his authentic self was being erased in favor of a more palatable version that fit the Sterling family's expectations. The fight ended with both of them frustrated and distant, but it clarified the fundamental tension in their relationship. Over the following weeks, Marcus felt increasingly isolated and conflicted. His old friends from construction had grown tired of his cancellations and excuses, while Victoria's social circle continued to treat him as an outsider being tolerated for her sake. He was caught between two worlds, fully accepted by neither. Elena's health continued to improve, but she noticed the change in her son's demeanor. You look tired, mijo. Not physically tired, but tired in your soul. Marcus sat beside her on the small couch in her apartment, surrounded by the modest furnishings and family photos that represented his real history. I don't know who I'm becoming anymore, Mom. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. Elena took his hand in her weathered fingers. Money can solve many problems, but it can't buy back your soul once you've sold it. The question you need to ask yourself is whether the person you're becoming is someone you can live with for the rest of your life. As Marcus prepared to leave his mother's apartment that evening, he realized he was facing a choice that went far beyond financial security or social status. He was choosing what kind of man he wanted to be and what values he was willing to compromise for success and acceptance. The proposal came on a perfect autumn evening at the Sterling family's private box at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Victoria had carefully orchestrated every detail, from the romantic dinner beforehand to the stunning diamond ring that Harold Sterling had personally helped select. As the orchestra played, Marcus found himself going through the motions of what should have been the happiest moment of his life. When Victoria said yes through tears of joy, the other wealthy patrons in nearby boxes applauded politely. Margaret Sterling was already making phone calls to begin wedding preparations, and Harold was discussing prenuptial agreements with their family lawyer. The engagement felt less like a personal milestone and more like a business merger being celebrated by stakeholders. Marcus tried to summon genuine enthusiasm, but something fundamental had changed in how he viewed their relationship. He saw clearly now that marrying Victoria meant accepting a lifetime of having his identity shaped by her family's expectations and values. The man he had been was being systematically replaced by someone more suitable for their social position. The next morning, Marcus drove to his mother's apartment to share the news. Elena was sitting by her window, doing physical therapy exercises with the determination that had carried her through decades of hardship. When he showed her the engagement announcement in the society pages of the newspaper, her reaction was more subdued than he had expected. "Are you happy, mijo?" she asked, studying his face rather than the newspaper photo. Marcus hesitated longer than he should have. "Victoria's a wonderful woman. Her family has been incredibly generous to us." Elena set down the newspaper and took her son's hands. "That's not what I asked. Are you happy? When you imagine spending the rest of your life as this person you're becoming, does it fill you with joy or obligation?" The question forced Marcus to confront feelings he had been avoiding. "I should be happy. This is everything I dreamed of when I was growing up poor. Financial security, social status, respect from successful people. Should be happy is not the same as being happy," Elena observed gently. "And sometimes the dreams we have when we're young don't fit the people we become when we grow up." Over the following weeks, wedding plans consumed Victoria's attention. She threw herself into selecting venues, designers, caterers, and florists with the enthusiasm of someone planning the social event of the season. The guest list grew to over 400 people, most of whom Marcus had never met. "I want to invite some people from my construction crew," Marcus mentioned during a planning session, "and some of Mom's friends from the hospital where she used to work." Victoria's expression grew uncomfortable. "Darling, this is going to be quite a formal affair. I'm not sure your work friends would be comfortable in that environment." Margaret Sterling was more direct. "Marcus, dear, we need to consider the overall tone and atmosphere we're creating. This wedding will be photographed for several society magazines. We want guests who enhance the elegance of the occasion." The message was clear. His old life and the people who represented it were not welcome at his new beginning. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of shame and anger, but he had learned to suppress these feelings rather than create conflict with Victoria's family. Meanwhile, Elena's recovery had plateaued. She was mobile and independent again, but the extensive medical treatments had taken a toll on her overall health. At 62, she looked older and more fragile than her age suggested. The stress of watching her son transform into someone she barely recognized added to her burden. "I've been thinking about moving back to Mexico," Elena mentioned during one of Marcus's visits. "My sister Maria says there's a small house I could rent cheaply near her family." Marcus was alarmed. "Mom, you can't leave now. Your doctors are here, and you're still recovering." Elena smiled sadly. "The doctors say I've recovered as much as I'm going to, and honestly, mijo, I feel like I'm watching my son disappear. Maybe some distance would be good for both of us." The conversation shook Marcus more than he expected. His mother had been the one constant in his life, the person who loved him unconditionally, regardless of his success or failure. The idea of her leaving felt like losing his last connection to his authentic self. That weekend, at another Sterling family gathering, Marcus found himself observing the interactions with new clarity. The conversations revolved around business deals, social obligations, and maintaining their position in Chicago's elite circles. There was little warmth or genuine affection, just the careful choreography of people managing their public image and financial interests. Victoria had seamlessly integrated him into this world, but Marcus realized he was performing a role rather than living authentically. Every opinion he expressed was filtered through considerations of what would be appropriate for his new social position. Every relationship was evaluated in terms of its usefulness to his career and social advancement. The breaking point came when Harold Sterling pulled him aside for a private conversation about his future at Sterling Industries. "I've been thinking about your role in the company after the wedding. There's a position opening up as Director of Community Relations. It would involve managing our charitable foundation and public outreach programs." Marcus understood immediately that this was not a business opportunity, but a way to keep him busy and visible without giving him any real authority or influence within the company. What would that involve exactly? Harold's explanation confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The job would be largely ceremonial, involving attending charity events and serving as a public face for Sterling Industries' community involvement. It was a position designed to make use of his working-class background for public relations purposes while keeping him away from actual business decisions. "You'd be perfect for it," Harold continued. "Your personal story of rising from poverty would resonate with our charitable partners and help us connect with communities we're trying to help." Marcus realized that his authentic background was being commodified, turned into a marketing tool for the Sterling family's philanthropic image. They wanted to use his past without allowing it to influence their present or future decisions. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through Victoria's penthouse apartment, looking at the expensive art and luxury furnishings that represented a lifestyle he had once thought would bring him fulfillment. Instead, he felt like a visitor in his own life, playing a character in someone else's story. When Victoria found him standing on the balcony at 3 in the morning, she was concerned but not surprised. "Pre-wedding jitters," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "It's completely normal to feel nervous about such a big change." Marcus leaned into her embrace, remembering why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. She was intelligent, beautiful, and genuinely caring within the context of her world. But he was beginning to understand that love might not be enough to bridge the fundamental differences in their values and life experiences. "Victoria," he said carefully, "do you think it's possible for people from very different backgrounds to build a life together without one of them losing who they really are?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I think people change and grow when they love each other. You've become more sophisticated and worldly since we've been together. That's not losing yourself. That's becoming the best version of yourself." But Marcus wasn't sure that the man he was becoming represented his best self or simply a more palatable version for her family's consumption. The question of who he really was and who he wanted to be had become the central crisis of his life. The final awakening came 3 weeks before the wedding. Marcus was reviewing the prenuptial agreement with Sterling Industries' legal team when he discovered a clause that would severely limit his ability to provide ongoing financial support to his mother. The agreement specified that any gifts or financial assistance to family members over a certain amount would require approval from the Sterling Family Trust. "It's just a standard protection," the lawyer explained. "It prevents family members from becoming a financial drain on Sterling Industries' resources." Marcus stared at the document, realizing that marrying Victoria would legally formalize his mother's position as a charity case subject to the Sterling family's judgment and approval. Elena would forever be dependent on their generosity, with no guarantee that their goodwill would continue if Marcus ever disappointed them or if family dynamics changed. That evening, Marcus drove to his mother's apartment without calling first. He found Elena packing boxes, preparing for her move to Mexico. Her small apartment looked even smaller with half her belongings already packed away. "I didn't expect you tonight," Elena said, looking up from a box of photographs. "Shouldn't you be busy with wedding preparations?" Marcus sat heavily on her old couch, the prenuptial agreement still in his briefcase. "Mom, can I ask you something? Honestly. If you could go back and make different choices, would you have sacrificed everything for Dad, even knowing he would leave us?" Elena stopped packing and studied her son's face. "That's a complicated question, mijo. I loved your father, but I also loved the idea of the life he promised us. When he left, I realized I had been in love with a dream rather than the reality of who he was. Do you think I'm making the same mistake?" Elena sat beside him on the couch. "Only you can answer that. But I will say this. The woman you're marrying is not the problem. The problem is that you're trying to become someone you're not in order to deserve her. Real love doesn't require you to erase yourself." That night, Marcus couldn't bring himself to return to Victoria's penthouse. Instead, he drove through the neighborhoods where he had grown up, past the construction sites where he had learned his trade, and through the working-class communities that had shaped his values and character. He stopped at a late-night diner where he and his construction crew used to eat lunch. Carlos was there, working a night shift as a security guard to support his growing family. When Carlos saw Marcus walk in wearing an expensive suit, his expression was guarded, but not hostile. "Look who's slumming it with the common folk," Carlos said, but his tone was more sad than angry. Marcus sat across from his old friend, suddenly aware of how much distance had grown between them. "I've been thinking about what you said, about becoming someone else." Carlos studied him for a moment. "You look successful, man. Expensive clothes, fancy car outside. That's what you wanted, right?" "I thought it was." Marcus struggled to find the words. "But I feel like I'm disappearing. Like the person I used to be is being erased bit by bit." "The person you used to be was my friend," Carlos said quietly. He was proud of where he came from and loyal to the people who cared about him. He wouldn't have been ashamed to bring his rich girlfriend to meet his working friends. The truth of that observation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had been ashamed of his background, his friends, and even his mother. He had allowed the Sterling family to convince him that his past was something to be overcome rather than honored. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He called Victoria and asked her to meet him at the small cafe where they had gone on one of their first dates, back when he still felt comfortable in his own skin. Victoria arrived looking radiant, carrying fabric samples for the wedding decorations. "I'm so glad you called. I wanted to show you the final color scheme. It's going to be absolutely perfect." Marcus watched her enthusiasm and felt a deep sadness for what they were both about to lose. "Victoria, we need to talk about something." "Important." Over the next hour, Marcus tried to explain his growing realization that their marriage would require him to abandon fundamental parts of his identity. He talked about the prenuptial agreement, the expectations placed on him by her family, and his fear that he was losing connection with everything that had made him who he was. Victoria listened with growing alarm and confusion. Marcus, these are just adjustments. Every couple has to compromise and adapt to each other's lives. You're overreacting to normal wedding stress. It's not normal wedding stress, Marcus said gently. It's the recognition that I'm being asked to become someone I don't want to be. Your family doesn't want you to marry me. They want you to marry the person they think I could become if I completely reinvent myself. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. You're throwing away our entire future over pride and stubbornness. We love each other. Isn't that enough to work through these other issues? Marcus reached across the table and took her hands. I do love you. But I'm realizing that love isn't always enough if two people want fundamentally different lives. You deserve someone who genuinely fits into your world, not someone who has to pretend to fit. The conversation that followed was painful for both of them. Victoria couldn't understand how Marcus could walk away from the opportunities and security she was offering. Marcus couldn't explain how suffocating it felt to be loved conditionally, based on his willingness to transform into someone else's vision of an appropriate partner. When Marcus returned the engagement ring, Victoria's shock gave way to anger. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. You'll never have another opportunity like this. And what about your mother? How will you take care of her without our help? The question haunted Marcus as he drove away from the cafe. He had chosen authenticity over security, but the practical consequences of that choice were sobering. Elena's medical needs were ongoing, and his construction supervisor salary wouldn't cover extensive care if her condition worsened. When he arrived at his mother's apartment, Elena took one look at his face and knew what had happened. You ended it, she said simply. Marcus nodded, unable to speak for a moment. I couldn't do it, Mom. I couldn't spend my life pretending to be someone else, even for all the money and opportunities in the world. Elena pulled her son into a fierce hug. I'm proud of you, mijo. It takes courage to choose who you are over who others want you to be. Over the following months, Marcus rebuilt his life on his own terms. He took a second job to help cover Elena's medical expenses, and they found ways to manage her care without the Sterling family's resources. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Elena decided to stay in Chicago rather than move to Mexico, saying she wanted to be near her son as he rediscovered himself. Their relationship deepened as Marcus stopped trying to be the perfect success story and allowed himself to be simply her son again. The construction company where Marcus worked promoted him to regional manager, recognizing skills and leadership qualities he had developed during his time in Victoria's world. He learned to apply his newfound sophistication and business knowledge in service of his own values rather than someone else's expectations. Sometimes, driving past the luxury high-rises he had helped build, Marcus wondered about the life he had rejected. Victoria married a Harvard MBA from a wealthy family 2 years later, and the wedding was featured in several society magazines. Marcus felt no regret when he saw the photos, only a quiet satisfaction that they had both found partners who fit naturally into their chosen worlds. Elena's health stabilized with careful management, and the loving attention of a son who had chosen family loyalty over social advancement. Marcus never became wealthy, but he built a life based on authentic relationships and values that reflected his true character. The choice had cost him financial security and social status, but it had saved his soul. In the end, Marcus realized that turning his back on his mother would have meant turning his back on everything that made him worth knowing. The man who could abandon his family for money and status was not someone he could live with being, regardless of the price of integrity.